So yes, I've never broken the law before until Tuesday when I got arrested here. I didn't think that I'd have to break the law to get politicians to listen to scientists, but apparently that's what you need to do. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about what I'm going to try and condense a 2-hour science talk into 15 minutes. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that I cannot include. There's just not enough time. Okay, so what is the science telling us about our current ecological catastrophe? The likely collapse of society and possible human extinction, which will entail if we do not urgently address this. We'll then look at the emotional response. That's right, scientists are now looking at the emotional response that is required to deal with this, because writing in scientific journals doesn't get us anywhere. We actually need to start talking to each other as humans, not just scientists. And then we'll look at some practical responses very briefly. So I'm here because of the precautionary principle, which says that when the costs of a risk are extremely high, we should not take that risk. We should exercise caution, and we should do something about it. But when you carry out a risk assessment, who do you listen to? Who do we believe? Last year saw the publication of the Worldwide Fund for Nature's Living Planet report, and the headlines are pretty stark. Since I was born in 1970, 60% of all vertebrates have been killed, have died. The number of vertebrates has decreased by 60%. 60. If I live to be 80 years old, there will be a 90% reduction in the number of vertebrates. There are lots of other figures I could give you, but I think that gives you enough, other than maybe one other. The insect numbers have also been decimated. In Germany, for example, in the last 25 years, the number of insects has declined by 75%. You may not like insects, but insects form the basis of pretty much all food chains. And without them, crops cannot pollinate, and we won't have any food. Soil fertility is being lost through intensive agriculture. Even dear Michael Gove, so loathed of experts, says that we may only have 30 to 40 years of soil fertility left unless we switch to non-intensive organic methods such as permaculture.
Is that all I've got? That's all I've got.
But you may not believe those reports.
Right.
Maybe you'll believe this. In 1990, at the UN's second climate conference, a famous chemist said this: "The danger of global warming is real enough for us to make changes and sacrifices so that we do not live at the expense of future generations. Our ability to come together to stop or limit damage to the world's environment will be perhaps the greatest test of how far we can act as a world community. No one should underestimate the imagination that will be required, nor the scientific effort, nor the unprecedented cooperation we shall have to show. We shall need statesmanship of a rare order. It's because we know that we are here today. There is already a clear case for precautionary action at an international level." So a chemist said that in 1990. Does anybody want to tell me who that chemist was?
Chemistry.
Margaret Thatcher. 30 years later, and the latest IPCC report from the UN gave us 12 years, last year, to halt catastrophic climate change, in which habitats are lost, species and coral reefs go extinct, and millions die due to disease, starvation, and warfare. Their report talks of being able to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, and ideally keeping it below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are currently at 1.1 degrees Celsius. And there are about 1 degree of locked-in warming being hidden by atmospheric pollution, which is rapidly decreasing as countries like India and China seek to get rid of air pollution in their cities. Individually, away from a committee, the world's leading scientists are telling us that these predictions are incredibly conservative. But why is this? It's because what's published by the IPCC is decided on by diplomats and lawyers, not by the scientists. Anybody who's ever been on a committee knows that consensus takes time, and so the difficult science is left out to be dealt with at a later date. Their worst case scenario predicts that Arctic summer sea ice may be gone by 2080, but the actual data suggests that it may be gone in 2, 3, 4 or 5 years. 20 years ago, I was learning about feedback loops at university. They're not even included in the IPCC's report because they require non-linear modelling, which is difficult to put accurate percentage predictions on. I'll give you an example of a feedback loop. It's called the albedo effect. Albedo just means reflectivity. Ice at the poles acts like a mirror, reflecting radiation back into space. But as the planet warms, the ice melts, and the dark seawater that is revealed absorbs huge amounts of heat. And so the ice melts, and dark sea absorbs more heat. And so we have a vicious circle. There are approximately 70 other known feedback loops in the global climate system. A paper published last year in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States studied the interactions of 10 of the largest feedback loops. It said that what happens is that one feedback loop raises the temperature just enough to initiate the next one. So the albedo effect may initiate the melting of the Arctic permafrost, which then releases huge amounts of methane, which is 21 to 25 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And then the Amazon dries out and catches fire and releases carbon dioxide and is incapable of sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so it goes on. It concludes that all of these will likely lead to a climate changing abruptly, leading to a hothouse Earth state, which means runaway climate change, possibly getting so hot that all life on Earth is wiped out. The paper suggests that tipping point may be as low as 2 degrees Celsius. And a letter published in the journal Nature this year suggests that we will reach that temperature by 2045. So when you hear politicians saying they're going to go zero carbon by 2050, think about that. Kevin Anderson is the head of the Tyndall Centre. It's the UK's leading academic centre for climate research. And he states that we have a less than 1% chance of keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees and only a 5% chance of keeping them below 2 degrees C. The likely temperature range we will be at by 2100 is 3 to 5 degrees C and continuing to rise. What does a world at 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels look like? Well, 75% of the world's current population would live in an area experiencing deadly heat and thus uninhabitable. Most of the United States of America, South America, all of Africa, most of Asia, all of Australia have been abandoned. Crops can be grown in Canada, Northern Europe, and the plains of northern Russia. Antarctica is seen as a refuge. Let's put this into perspective. Imagine the conflicts that would happen before we got to that state. Here's an example. Between 2006 and 2011, Syria experienced the worst drought in 5,000 years since civilization began. That caused 2 to 3 million Syrian farmers to leave their land and move to Damascus to protest against Assad. That was the tipping point that threw Syria and the Middle East into one of the largest conflicts we've seen in decades. And what happened? Millions of people have moved towards Europe, seeking somewhere safer to live. And what's happened within Europe? We've been destabilized. It's been the rise of the right, of populist politics looking for simple solutions. And we are at a dangerous state in our own politics. We won't have to wait until the end of the century to see the effects. Last year was the hottest on record, but so was something like 17 out of the last 20 years. And last year, cereal and vegetable crop production were down 25 to 35%. Cereals in particular are very susceptible to heat stress. There are only 4 months worth of global food reserves. So if every year is getting hotter and we have 25% reductions in yield, how long do we have to wait before there are no food reserves? It is very likely that there will be major food shortages worldwide, including in the UK, within a decade. What will this city look like when there is no food?
Riots, civil unrest. I want to be here.
Worse. If you want to know what it looks like, do some research into the Cultural Revolution in China in the late 50s and early 60s. 40 million people died. And I'm not going to even say, in front of children, I'm not going to talk about actually what happened.
Number of the base 666.
I'd like you to think about some of these things when you get a chance, but we've got a lot to get through today, and I've been asked to keep it brief. But these are really upsetting things. When I started learning about quite how severe it was, my depression raised its ugly head, and I didn't sleep for months. Since 1990, carbon emissions have gone up by 60%. In the last 25 years, our carbon emissions have equaled the carbon emissions of the preceding 250 years. A global economy growing at 3% per year doubles every 24 years. Every year, the amount of carbon dioxide that is emitted is the equivalent of a forest fire that is 1.3 times the size of all of Africa. If you switched on the news and you saw a forest fire that big burning, you'd be scared. Going back to Professor Kevin Anderson from the Tyndall Centre, he explores why as a species we seem to procrastinate, somehow believing that we will be better able to sort these problems out tomorrow. Our children will work it out. New technology will save us. But this is deluded and grossly irresponsible. We have been avoiding relatively simple solutions today in favour of complex or non-existent ones in the future. So what do we need to do? First, we must allow ourselves to take these facts in, to feel the grief and to express it. And then we must ask ourselves, how do we intend to act? Dr. Kate Marvel is a climate scientist at NASA. And she says, we need courage. We need the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. You and I need to force our government to act, to mobilise in a way not seen since World War II. Massive investment is needed to reduce carbon dioxide through changes in transport, agriculture, and ecosystem restoration. It is possible, but it requires political will, and it is our job to create that. Extinction Rebellion's strategy, based on sound political science, is that a very small number of upstanding individuals who have the courage to address the issues stand up and thereby encourage bystanders to follow. good news is that it doesn't take many people to make a difference, which gives everyone on this bridge, anyone who hears this talk, an opportunity to do something truly amazing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for giving me hope.